Belgian humanitarian aid worker Olivier van der Kasteel is free after a prisoner exchange takes place with Iran. After 455 days of detention in Iran, Belgian humanitarian worker Olivier van der Kasteel is finally free. He was imprisoned in Tehran in February last year on charges of espionage, where he was sentenced to 40 years in jail with 74 lashes. The announcement was made by the Prime Minister of Belgium, who says that van der Kasteel was taken to Amman, where a team of Belgian soldiers and diplomats took care of him.
Pour moi, le choix a toujours été clair. La vie d'Olivier a toujours primé. C'est une responsabilité que je prends sur moi, que j'assume. Nous n'abandonnons en Belgique personne, encore moins un innocent.
According to the Iranian government, a prisoner exchange has taken place between Belgium and Iran. Tehran confirmed that there was a swap involving van der Kasteel and an Iranian diplomat called Asadullah Assadi, who's been convicted of terrorism in Belgium. The news will come as a relief to van der Kasteel's friends and family, who were concerned about his well-being and deteriorating health.
At least 2 people have been killed and 23 injured in an apparent Russian missile strike on a medical clinic in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. 2 children were among the wounded. Local officials said one of those who died was a 69-year-old man. Several buildings were heavily damaged in the attack, which caused fires over a wide area. Russia has stepped up airstrikes across Ukraine in recent weeks as Kyiv prepares its forces for a counter-offensive. Ukrainian air defences said they repelled multiple attempted missile and drone strikes. Russia's also seen an increase in air attacks, which it blames on Ukraine. The mayor of the border city of Krasnodar said a residential building and an office were damaged after being targeted by drones. There were no reports of injuries. Elsewhere, Russian authorities said areas of the Belgorod region came under artillery fire from Ukrainian forces.
Yevgeny Prigozhin announced on the 25th of May that Wagner Group began handing over its positions in Bakhmut to the Russian Ministry of Defense and claimed that Wagner will entirely withdraw from the city by the 1st of June. Now, the Institute for the Study of War released a retrospective on the battle for Bakhmut, saying that Russian year-long drive began as part of a theoretically sensible but overly ambitious operational effort, but ended as a purely symbolic gesture that cost tens of thousands of Russian casualties. The siege of Bakhmut was originally intended to facilitate Russian offensive to encircle large Ukrainian forces in the east and specifically to take the large and fortified cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk from multiple directions. Bakhmut was not a primary Russian objective during the early phases of the war. Russia reprioritized the battle for Bakhmut in July-August last year, following the culmination of Russian attacks on Severodonetsk-Lysychansk line, which proved extremely costly and slow, consuming a high proportion of Russian offensive capabilities in Donbass. The successful Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv region in September 2022 that liberated Izum ended the prospect of a wide encirclement of Ukrainian forces in the east, thus depriving the attacks on Bakhmut of operational significance. Wagner mercenaries nevertheless intensified their offensives on Bakhmut and fully committed to the battle for Bakhmut in autumn 2022, likely to achieve informational and political rather than operational objectives. The Institute for the Study of War says it is not even clear that the Battle of Bakhmut is yet over. Ukrainian forces have been conducting local counterattacks on Bakhmut's flanks, having regained the initiative following Wagner's culmination. Now, the decision to allow the battle to end or force it into a new phase now lies with Kyiv. Ukraine thus now has the initiative at every level of war across almost entire front.
Climate activists chanted criminals and murderers as they disrupted the start of the annual shareholder meeting of the French oil giant Total Energies in Paris. Hundreds of protesters attempted to prevent people getting into the event, and although attendees forced their way through, there was some sympathy for the activists' aims.
Ce que vous défendez, ça concerne tout le monde. Tout le monde est concerné. Et j'ai le droit d'aller justement manifester mon opinion à l'Assemblée générale.
Et justement, quelle sera votre opinion qui se fait exprimer
Il faut que Total se reconvertisse dans les énergies renouvelables.
The activists denounce Total Energies, accusing the company of posting record profits while they say its activities threaten ecosystems and the whole planet.
Le PDG de Total a dit qu'il y avait une guérilla contre l'entreprise. Alors oui, on va dire qu'on est une guérilla, mais notre seule arme, c'est les rapports du GIEC. Et aujourd'hui, le consensus sur le fait que leur activité est obscène, eh bien, il est partagé à travers l'échiquier politique.
Police fired tear gas canisters in an attempt to disperse protesters, and social media networks lit up with videos purporting to show police gassing activists lying on the ground. Disruption of oil company meetings is becoming increasingly common.
Founder of the extremist group Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, has been sentenced to 18 years in prison for his participation in the January 6th Capitol riots in Washington. After his sentencing, Rhodes claimed that he was a political prisoner, a sentiment that the U.S. district judge disputed, but his lawyer repeated.
There's no way that he was the leader or the director of what happened on January 6th. He was just a convenient target. The Oath Keepers were a convenient target. The DOJ looked at them and said, oh, here are the scapegoats of what happened on January 6th.
The sentence for seditious conspiracy was the longest handed out so far in more than 1,000 Capitol riot cases. In 2021, thousands of supporters of former US President Donald Trump stormed Capitol Hill in a violent attempt to keep him in power at all costs. At least 9 people died.
Thank you. My daughter is waiting for me, so I'm very happy that I will be with her in a bit.
Greek MEP Eva Kaili is on probation and without an electronic bracelet. The Belgian Federal Prosecutor's Office has lifted the house arrest imposed on the former Vice President of the European Parliament since last April, after she spent 4 months in prison. Kaili was arrested in December for her part in a corruption scandal involving the government of Qatar and MEPs. Both governments angrily deny playing any role.
On the outskirts of Hungary's second largest city, work is underway to build a huge electric vehicle battery plant. The project on the outskirts of Debrecen covers around 222 hectares and comes in at 7.3 billion euros. Plans for another factory have already been approved, but there have been protests over fears it will threaten drinking water supplies and damage the environment.
Ezek a gyárak, amelyek ide települnek, ezek a hatalmas üzemek, az akkumulátorgyárak, óriási mértékű vizet használnak fel, elképesztő mértékű az energia szükségletük. És azt tudni kell, hogy ezek gyakorlatilag összeszerelő üzemek.
The government hopes the factory will make the country a global hub of lithium-ion battery manufacturing and create thousands of jobs. They also claim it will use mainly wastewater, but residents are not convinced.
Ha megnézzük a vizet, Debrecennek nincsen folyóvize. Nem bízunk a szürke víz technológiában, nem látjuk, hogy ez hogy fog megvalósulni. Ha a gyáraknak már megvan adva az ivóvíz engedélye, miért használnák föl a szennyezett vizet? Nagyon-nagyon sok olyan kérdés van, amit hiába kérdezünk, csak sablonválaszokat kapunk.
Environmental experts say there's been a lack of impact studies on the longer-term consequences for Hungary's air, soil and water. They say it's not clear the country's natural resources can cope with the government's ambitious battery factory plans.
Georgian farmers are struggling to make ends meet due to a series of challenges 2 years in the making. Mindia Gushikashvili is one of them. He says many farmers doubled their crop fields this year to catch up with the rising prices that lowered their value. They say there is no demand for their crops, that they are forced to sell below the cost to produce them. While farmers expand their fields to catch up, they are also faced with the rising cost to rent land. Storage is also an issue. Tamaz Baliashvili is set to begin his harvest in 20 days, but this barn is still full from last season's crops. Experts say the demand for local crop has reduced because of Russian economic policy. 2 years ago, Russia imposed a tax on its imports, but it excluded flour, causing it to become cheaper than Georgian flour and the preferred product for local buyers. As a result, barns in Georgia started to fill up after each harvest.
Ისკულ კომბინატებს ვერ უღირთ შემოტანა და კონკურენციას შესვლა იმპორტირებულ ფქვილთან. შესაბამისად, მათ შეაჩერეს მუშაობა და ამან გამოიწვია ის, რომ ფერმერებს, რომელსაც მოწეული ჰქონდა ჩარშანდელი მოსავალი, მათ წელს ვერ ჩააბარეს ხორბალი ისკულ კომბინატებს.
This put Georgian mills at a standstill. Representatives of the troubled industry are in constant communication with the Ministry of Agriculture of Georgia. According to the ministry, they are searching for a solution to relieve wheat producers of their frustration without raising the market price. In the meantime, the harvest season falls in less than a month, and farmers have little to no idea or where to store the fresh crop while the old crop sits unsold.
Peruvian police have seized cocaine stuffed into packets embedded with the Nazi flag in a shipment that was designed for Belgium. Officers say 58 kilos of the narcotic were discovered in the port of Paita in a Liberian flag ship that had arrived from Ecuador. The drugs had been hidden inside a container containing asparagus. The operation involved a search of some 80 containers on board the vessel. Peruvian authorities say they have often found cocaine in packs marked with various symbols, but never before with the symbol of Nazi Germany.